and go.
Hello, everybody. I'm Katie Mancini from Chicago, moderating tonight's event. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have a robust conversation with Joanne and Colleen. First up, I would like to introduce Dr. Reverend Todd Urey to talk to us a little bit about our precursor for tonight's conversation and introduce himself to the team here tonight.
Well, Katie, thank you and good evening to all of you. Certainly, I'm privileged to be able to share with you in an important conversation on tonight. My name is Todd Urey. I'm the senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, but I'm also the chief administrative officer of the Rainbow Push Coalition, which is the international civil and human rights organization founded by Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so on behalf of Reverend Jackson, I certainly greet all of you on tonight, and I bring his good wishes and regards and appreciation for your commitment to such an important conversation as this one. The discussion tonight, as I was thinking about how we consider framing, is kind of historical disconnect between how we deal with poverty and how we allow the condition of poverty to trap certain communities over others. Some years ago, when I was teaching a political science course at the University of Baltimore here, one of the texts I used was Michael Harrington's text, The Other America. And if we remember how Harrington sets up the conversation, he actually argues that there are two Americas. There is this one America where the options are very limited, the conditions are very constricted, the plight is very bleak, and another America for which you don't have those kinds of difficulties or entanglements. And I believe it was a very forthright introduction that we could not just ignore the obvious concern about poverty, because very often we disregard poverty as a matter of choices. Somehow other poor people have just found themselves choosing to be resource inadequate and unable to meet basic fundamental needs. In working with Reverend Jackson, we believe that dealing with the issue of resource access is fundamental to the principles of human rights. We've got to elevate the conversation about poverty beyond just how much does it cost and who's going to pay for it, which we're beginning to hear coming out of this Congress, that after this most recent response to the ongoing global pandemic, what we saw was that government had the ability and put forth the wherewithal to respond to the needs of priority interest, dealing with the interest of businesses, dealing with the interest of corporations, coming a little late to dealing with small businesses, and then ultimately finally getting around to state and local governments who have expended so much of their own resource to try to respond. But what we've not had is a fundamental conversation around the issues of poverty. And now that that's coming back to the fore, we're beginning to hear this conversation about who's going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Well, we've already paid for it. We pay for it in the assault on the human dignity of people who are ready, willing, and able to go to work, but can't find a job that pays a living wage. And so now they have to find a way to fit 3 full-time jobs, sometimes more, into a space that causes them to compromise, make difficult choices about, can I have family time, or do I need to figure out how to keep a roof over my head? Somewhere along the lines, we have to make a call that it is immoral not to find the resources to help people address poverty. And something as fundamental as being able to take care of basic needs like diapers, right? Reverend's passion has been this diaper push, that families don't always have the ability to use, those that are relying on public assistance, which, oh, by the way, we call them entitlements in political speak. But I've never heard anyone who is poor consider insufficient resource and entitlement. You're saying I'm entitled to have not enough, and that becomes the bane of my existence. We've got to reframe the issue in a way that is not only responsible, but in the words of Dr. King, they would also be righteous. And so we need a righteous, moral, economic agenda and a political platform that allows us to bring human dignity back to the conversation around human rights and basic sustenance that allows human beings to take care of human needs. And so if we just build on that early conversation, the other America is not the other America, it is this America. It is who we are and who we have been, and yet we have to now decide, will we find the courage to address the issues? And that's not, that we call those issues sometimes progressive. We say we gotta have a progressive agenda. No, I don't think we have to categorize it so neatly. I think it is fundamental to the core of who we say we are as a nation. If we can find a way to allow corporations and the top 1% to completely recover from the economic disaster that has been COVID-19, we ought to at the same time have the courage to address the issues of those that are what we would call in the church the least of these, those who are most vulnerable and at risk because their economic plight leaves them exposed. And so I would suggest that tonight our commitment ought to be to partner together, to link arms, stand shoulder to shoulder, and continue to fight for human dignity as a human right by making sure that the poor are not living in the other America. The poor need to have what's necessary so they can become part of this America so that everybody can have a place in the fabric of our society. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, and I look forward to how we will continue to do this important work in the days to come.
Thank you, Reverend. That was inspirational to me as I think about this book, Broken America, and the authors that wrote it. So first, introductions for Colleen Shaddox and Joanne Samuel Goldblum, partners in creating Broken America and getting a story told for so many of us to learn from, to hear, and then to do something with, which is what I get excited about. But more to come. First, introductions. We can start with Colleen and then go to Joanne for quick introductions. And then I'm going to start to pepper you with questions.
So my name's Colleen Shaddox. I am a journalist for the most part. Quit a job when I was told by my boss that I was writing too many stories about poor people. Went to work in a soup kitchen, and I've kind of had one foot in both worlds ever since. I've worked an awful lot in the juvenile justice system, trying to get some equity for kids, trying to end the criminalization of child development. And along the way, I worked a whole lot with my friend Joanne Goldblum, who introduced me to diaper need and the wonderful things that can happen in a person's life when you solve it.
Thanks, Colleen. And first, thank you, Dr. Uri, Reverend Uri. That was a wonderful introduction and really so inspiring. And as I listened to you, what I was thinking was, wow, he could have written this book. You know, you were so talking about exactly what we want to be talking about. And, you know, I guess my introduction is I'm a social worker. And, you know, I come to this very differently than lots of other people. I come to this from a place of privilege. I've never experienced poverty. And as a younger mother, when my kids were school age and I was doing direct service, social work, I was, you know, community-based. I went to people's homes. What I saw over and over again was, first off, a level of poverty that even as somebody who thought that they understood what poverty in America looked like, when I was going into people's homes, I saw things that I never could have expected, like moms emptying diapers out, emptying the solids out of diapers and putting them back on their baby. And I was also always struck by the forgiveness that I was given as a mother of young children that my clients weren't. And I sort of couldn't stop thinking about it. You know, every time my kids were late for school, or I was late to pick my kids up, or I didn't bring lunch, or I didn't sign something I should have signed. Endless forgiveness. As a middle class, upper middle class white woman, I can complain bitterly about how stressful my life is. And people are so kind to me about it. And my clients didn't get that same forgiveness that I got. And I really became just obsessed with the idea that there was no way that this was okay, that just because of the luck of the draw, I and my children had everything they needed. And other people that I knew and were working with didn't. And again, through nothing except, the chance of life. And so that really drove my work with starting the Diaper Bank, starting the National Diaper Bank Network, and that eventually led to this book.
And we're glad you wrote it. So because, Reverend, you talked about an agenda for human dignity, and you talked about human beings getting together to fight for, to solve for, to give human needs, those basics. And I think for any agenda to be successful, no matter the agenda, you need advocates. And when I read the book, Colleen and Joanne, that you wrote, at the very beginning, you talked about a definition of advocates are people who simply will not go away. And that stuck with me, because what a simple way to define what an advocate is and all that they can become. And you two, I think, have had such dedication at that advocate level. You do not go away. You will not go away, nor do you want to. We don't want you to either. When I read this book, there was moments of awakening. I was pissed. I was curious. I was delighted to know that you had peppered it with what can we do? What actions can you take? Because I think that poverty in America is and should be emotional. And if you don't feel emotional reading this book, if you don't feel emotional talking about the basics of poverty, we need to have an awakening moment. And I think that's what we want to get tonight to with Colleen and Joanne tonight. So my first question, Reverend also talked about COVID and the timeliness right now. I do think that there is a moment for everything, and choosing now to write this book after a lifetime of service and the emotion that you have felt personally and professionally. Tell us a little bit about why now is the right time for this book. Why now do you feel compelled more than any others to tell this story?
I'm not sure that, I think we've been working on this book for a few years. I think that more than that this was the right time for us to write the book, it's more that this is now COVID has brought to bear everything that we were writing about. And because of that, there is so much more of a focus. And of course, also because of the Biden-Harris administration and their commitment to ending poverty. I don't know, Colleen, is that right?
I mean, the way that I talk about it is that COVID has exposed fault lines that were always there. And there were always people falling into those crevices. Mm-hmm. But we are so economically as well as racially segregated in this country that people could ignore that. And now you can't ignore it, right? Joanne's diaper banks are getting 200, 300, 400, 500% of the requests that they used to, because folks who used to be fairly comfortable no longer are. And part of that is because as Americans, our wages are so pathetically low that we don't have savings. So a lot of people who maybe were doing all right by being really stressed out, maybe working an extra job, were getting by, had no money in the bank. And so no cushion to get through life's hard spots. COVID isn't the first and it won't be the last. And if we want to not see a repeat of what's happening right now, we really need to think about this economy from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. And I would add, Dr. Uri, early on, you spoke about the fact, the divided America, two Americas. I think part of what happened and the reason that COVID has laid this so bare is that so many people who thought they were in the other America, they were in the America that didn't have to struggle, are now in that other place. And I really think it did open people's eyes because of the economic and racial segregation that exists in our country. It's very easy to pretend that these things are never going to impact us personally. And I think that this last year, everybody knew before COVID started that 40% of Americans didn't have enough money in their bank to meet an unexpected expense. Mm-hmm. Nobody expected another 40% of Americans to fall into that same place. And I think it just, it really came out in a way that people couldn't ignore anymore.
Well, in your book, and I think you both have quoted that poverty makes everything harder. And what you unpack is what is that broader definition of poverty? And I think that there are stereotypical things we think of or we might see in the movies, and it comes to a certain persona we might have in our head when we think poor or when we think, underprivileged or underserved. But you talk about things like water, power, transportation, minimum wage, diapers, hygiene, and it gets so complicated in a way that was so shocking almost to think about and overwhelming to think about emotionally. And so there's a deeply rooted narrative in the US that despite shortcomings, this is the land of opportunity. And those that end up in poverty only have themselves to blame. You challenge that frame and you say that it's not the people, it's our system. It's what our system has put in place, and that fights, I think, drastically against human beings and human nature. And that's what's responsible for poverty's continuation. Can you talk a little bit more at that broad level of infrastructure that's helped poverty become worse?
Sure. When we talk about poverty in the United States, we generally want to fix people. Right? I will educate you out of poverty, or I will motivate you out of poverty. You got to stop making these bad decisions. When you're in poverty, there are no good decisions, right? And infrastructure is a great way to level things. Mm-hmm. For example, if you cannot afford a car, but there is decent public transportation where you live, you can get to work, you can get to stores, you can do the things you need to do. But if you can't, then you're stuck. Actually, automobile ownership has been going up among low-income people because there's no other way to get to work. We interviewed one woman who was paying off 3 cars at the same time. 2 of them had already died. She had bought them at buy here, pay here lots, which is an incredibly exploitive thing. It's a used car lot where the seller is also the lender. And if you don't have credit, they will sell you a car, no money down. They will sell it to you for considerably more than it's worth. You'll have these really high payments and a good chance that you're going to miss payments and then get the car repossessed. And that's fine with the dealer because they just sell it to the next person. And people love to do like financial literacy classes to tell people that this is a bad thing to do. Everybody I talked to that did it knew it was a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
I had to get to work. I had to get my kid to school. There was no public means to do that. So I had to buy a car, and this is the only place that would sell me one. And we keep seeing that over and over, these kinds of quicksands that people get trapped in and can't get out of.
Well, and it's funny because the reason that I actually started the New Haven Diaper Bank 17 years ago is because of toilet paper. So I worked with this family, a mom who was developmentally disabled, who had 3 kids under 3, and they never had toilet paper in the house. And as I said, I'm a social worker, I'm a clinician. I was going in to try to support the family in the different ways that, I had available. Most of that was through, the idea was that I was going to teach parenting skills. And I kept coming back and saying, there's no clinical intervention for not having toilet paper. And so there I was at Yale Child Study Center saying, it's true, maybe there are issues, but the reason her baby is in a diaper all day is because she can't afford a diaper. The reason they're using a cloth in the bathroom instead of toilet paper is because she can't afford toilet paper. And that's it. And I began to really, like I said, I was at Yale, so everybody was, you got to research things first, right? Understand why this is happening. And what I came to understand is that, in large part as a result of welfare reform in 1996, the safety net, such as it was, and it was never great, but such as it was gone. And that many, many families across the country were living exclusively on SNAP benefits, on food stamps, that was the only income there was. And as I started talking to elected officials and bureaucrats, people who were in the position to make changes, most of them said to me, "Oh, you must be wrong. We have to cover diapers. What are you saying?" Like, people who really knew a lot about this didn't know this. And I think what Colleen and I really wanted to say is there are lots of things like that, but you have to really look at the details. You can say, "Oh, we have a safety net," and so sort of we do, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't really catch people. And all it does is sort of make the people far to the right feel like people are getting too much, and the people far to the left saying they're not enough. It doesn't change.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned SNAP and you mentioned SNAP benefits, and today they do make a difference. Mm-hmm. And they are helpful. It feels like it's not enough, and it's based on assumptions. And you talked about the importance of the details, and it doesn't feel like those details are being brought to life the right way through SNAP. So can you tell us a little bit more, educate us a little bit on what SNAP is doing well, and then what are those assumptions that just make it not enough yet?
So Colleen, what if I say what they're doing well and you talk about the assumptions?
Sure.
And then Dr. Uri, you should feel free to jump in. You certainly have as much or more knowledge about this than us. So please feel free. It works because there's a lot of research that shows families who receive SNAP benefits that their children graduate from high school at a higher rate. So that's a positive, right? Graduating from high school is a positive across the board. And so SNAP certainly helps with that. And there are other studies that show other benefits that basically, and of course, when I say it like this, it's not rocket science. Kids do better when they eat, right? If you have some food at home, there's a better chance you're going to do okay in school, because when you're hungry, nobody functions well when they're hungry. And so, in those ways, it's positive. It certainly doesn't do enough. Right, Colleen?
Yeah, SNAP needs to be expanded dramatically, right? The benefit is too low. There are all sorts of time limits and various other things that can keep people from getting the benefits they need. And it's based on this thing called the Thrifty Food Plan that makes assumptions about how people cook and conduct their lives that just have no basis in reality. Like, you get a very small portion of frozen entrees on the thrifty food plan that ends up being like 3/4 of a fish stick. So good luck with that. It also assumes that people on the thrifty food plan will spend much more time cooking food than the average American does, which we know is going to be less and less in most households. We interviewed these girls. They were in middle school. They were in a summer program for kids who had flunked PE. And what they had to do in the summer program was they did an exercise program, and they also did this project on the food environment and fast food. And, you know, they'd made wonderful posters, and they could tell you all sorts of things about how many calories were in a Happy Meal and how you shouldn't eat that stuff. And after they'd done their really great presentation, I said to them, so I'm curious, do any of you still eat fast food? They all did. One girl ate it every night for dinner without fail. And I said, so tell me, what is that about? Both her parents were certified nursing assistants. They had to work 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. So their routine was drop the kids off at school, go to work, pick the kids up from school, go through a drive-through, give the kids dinner, and then go back to work again. What else could they have possibly done? You know, again, we talk about choices and people making bad choices. Poverty takes away choices.
Well, you said the word options too. It's like, what's my best option? And in a situation of poverty, you don't have many. Right. And so your choices are often laid out in front of you, right? And when I think about this spider web that has poverty at the center, and you think about, where do I get my food? Where do I eat? Where do I get clean? Where do I get that diaper change? Where do I whatever? And I can't not think of home. And what does home represent emotionally, but physically home? And I think that people in a world of poverty have been discriminated against drastically in our history. They've not been able to purchase a home. They've been screwed over by people that they should have trusted. There's so much fraudulent activity. And what I get excited about today in Chicago, Evanston, for everyone on the phone living in Chicago, Evanston today, there was a news story that announced finally reparations are being given to people that suffered discrimination in housing practices from 1919 to 1963. The first and the only city to do that. Reverend, you're nodding your head. I'm imagining that, you know, this was a great article to read, but it's a first step. And so I hear that news today. And I think to the book and the stories that you told about housing and homelessness. We'll talk about homelessness in a minute, but share with us some of the stories from those terrible housing situations where you go somewhere with all of your money, your family's land, a dream of having a place for your family to center out of, and somebody taking that all away for their own benefit or their own pocket.
Well, one that comes to mind is right in North Lawndale. There was a gentleman whose name I think will be familiar to many of you, Mark Diamond, who ran a scam for 1,000 years there, where he would send one of his associates to somebody's home, and always an elderly person, and it was only in an African-American neighborhood. Hey, I noticed that your porch roof is sagging. You know, there are government grants that can get that fixed up for you. Absolutely free. You don't have to pay anything. And he would get these folks to sign, and there would be all sorts of pressure like, oh, you know, we have to do it by midnight tonight or you can't get it or whatever. And what they were signing was reverse mortgages. They were signing away the homes that their families had worked so hard on. I went to this one home where Diamond told them he was going to fix leaks in the basement. And I went down to the basement with the homeowner, who has asthma, by the way. And there was black mold in the basement up to my chest. You could see light shining out the door to the outside where water would just come racing through. He'd done this horrible job on it. And they only got to keep their home. And this is still tentative. They were in their home right then because Northwestern University's legal clinic filed a class action suit against Diamond to try and make homeowners whole. It's really interesting to me that Diamond had pulled the same thing decades earlier, and he was still free to do what he was doing. These financial crimes are very hard to prosecute, so they don't tend to get prosecuted. And at the same time, these folks' sons and grandsons would commit crimes that, paled in significance to what this guy was doing. And there'd be a squad car there right away to take them away. There was no protection. There was just no protection for people who had done everything they were supposed to do, right, to achieve the American dream. And it was just taken away. And he got away with it for decades and decades.
Katie, to the point about the reparations, right? Economic restitution for generations of harm done by just very nefarious, hostile policies. That's what the whole national conversation has been. We get pushed back on even the notion of studying how to make folks whole who have been intentionally harmed by bad public policy. And we know it's been bad public policy. We just figure that since there's, to Colleen's point, there's no accountability, so why change it if we're not going to be held responsible for it? When we talk about what it means to be poor, Evanston, I spent 10 years of my life there. So, grad school is where I live, Sheridan Road. I spent a whole lot of time up there between seminary and doctoral work. But what it speaks to is, Chicago, as other urban enclaves, as the flip side with rural America, is this notion that if we were to do an experiment on the appropriation, the allocation, the per meal allocation under SNAP, we're privileged. Let's do a field experiment. We're gonna give you a little less than $1.50 per person per meal. We're going to send you out and say, go survive and take care of your family. We can't pay, in my reality, I can't pay attention for $1.50, much less buy anything to eat. To then impose that, and I love the last chapter. I got to get the book because the poor don't always have to be with us. That's always the quandary inside communities of faith, because one of the telling stories in the scriptures is the story of the rich young ruler. He asks, what must I do to inherit the kingdom? And he's told, go sell what you have and give to the poor. And he went away despondent because he did not have it within him to find a way. Here's the word, to share. Poor people only want their fair share. They're not asking for more than this notion. When we talk about $15 an hour, well, that's an improvement, but that's just a different variation of saying we're really promoting almost. Because in Maryland, where I am, it takes $23 an hour to basically take care of one adult and one child. So when we're framing this, we've got to ask ourselves, not what's the number that folks think it ought to be. What is the number that is really required for folks to have a wage? These are not folks that don't want to go to work. These aren't folks I remember when welfare reform was signed by President Clinton, and the notion, the optics were just horrible. And the impression was that somehow or other there was this meritocracy standard that was being applied to poor people, that if we just inspired them, I think, it may have been mentioned earlier, that if we inspire them to just do more, they'll have the incentive. Well, that's not what this is. Everybody says economically full employment in the United States is an unemployment rate, a reported unemployment rate of somewhere around 4 to 5%. Now, and that's just the folks that that's not counting the folks that fall through the cracks. So even if you had widespread commitment to this meritocracy notion, there's still a mass of people who are going to get left behind. And here's the thing, by design. Our economic system is designed to leave some folks in the lurch. And if those folks don't have anybody to advocate, to stand there, because they're too busy trying to survive. They're trying to take care of the kids. They're trying to make sure that the kids, all of those things. When we start talking about this thing, Diapers is a fundamental symbol of just the inhumanity
Right.
of taking away somebody's dignity. None of us would want to sit in soiled clothes and not have the ability to at least, that's a basic human dignity factor. And when we think about all of the things that flow from it, and I'll give you all a little confession, Colleen, you were talking about the car sales. Well, years ago, I was in the car business. It was the only job I could get when I was 18 years old. And guess what? I worked on one of those lots, and there's a name for it. We call it tote your note. And it's a tote your note lot because if you come in and you decide you want to buy it, guess what? We'll tote your note. We'll carry your note. And here's what it is: a 1976 Ford Pinto. Y'all remember the Pinto of all things? You know, how much did you sell a Ford Pinto for in at that time, the mid 1980s? It was $19.95 every time they put it out on the lot. And so the exploitation that comes with it, I'm doing penance to this day because some of the things that I was just too clueless to even know, because that was normalized. We have normalized the exploitation of poor people, and we're not yet to the point where we're offended in mass. That in the United States of America, the beacon to the world about so much about what should be done for human rights, that we allow this to happen in our streets on a daily basis. We use school systems as supplemental feeding programs. We use the schools to be able to wash the clothes of kids where they don't have the ability to wear clean clothes. Teachers are doing laundry and trying to teach math. And this is in this America, not the other America. And we've got to stop being in denial. And so I applaud the two of you on this book to tell these stories and to put it in our face, because we cannot ignore this anymore. We like to say, well, I just didn't know it was that bad. Well, here, let's help you work with that, because this book will help you to appreciate that it really is that bad. And now the question then falls to the rest of us. What are we going to do to stand in solidarity with those who need advocates to change this dynamic and to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to embrace and enjoy human dignity?
Yeah. That's that's it, you know? And I think it's really, I mean, first off, of course, that was beautifully said. And I think that this idea that, diapers are a window into poverty. That's really what I've found, is that because it is almost impossible. I mean, there are people who do it, but almost impossible to find someone who says, no, I'm good with my neighbor's child sitting in a dirty diaper all day. That is, you've really got to be pretty confident to say, nah, you know what? If they can't afford to diaper their baby, I'm good with that baby just sitting there. And then you say, okay, that's a different conversation we need to have, right? That's just something different. So I think it's really, it's hard.
Well, I want to stick on diapers for a minute, because this is where you educated me personally, Joanne, on what we can say is a house of cards. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about diapers. And you think diapers, what does that have to do with anything? Or how does that have a ripple effect? But I would love for you to give that house of cards story and show why diapers is actually so very important.
Sure. So I think for a few different reasons. I mean, the first is what I just said. It is something that almost all of us can agree everybody needs. Now, of course, I would think that about food as well. And, we know that that's not true, but still. So one is that people need it, and it's babies. And so, as a country, we like to say that we really care about children and babies. And so this is a pretty basic aspect. But the reason that I first started focusing on diapers, it was this family that I described who really sort of crystallized it for me. But the reason is because it is one small thing. And what I always say is it's the small things that impact the big things, right? So a diaper can keep a child out of childcare. You must provide an adequate supply. Now, there may be someone who has a daycare that will accept cloth diapers. There are very few of them. There are some, but very few. So most childcare centers, daycare centers, require an adequate supply of diapers, disposable diapers for your child every day. And if you don't have them, you miss school or work. So, it is a diaper that can be the difference between keeping a job and losing it. And the difference between keeping a job and losing it is the difference between keeping an apartment and losing it, keeping your family fed and not being able to keep your family fed. They're very, very specific things. And I have no illusion that every diaper makes it so someone doesn't become homeless, right? I know it's not necessarily that connection, but it often does. And what I always ask people to think about when it comes to the issue of diapers and other hygiene products is, what does it take for you to get out of the house in the morning? Mm-hmm. How many products do you use in your bathroom, in your kitchen, to get yourself and your family out of the house? And each of those things are things that cannot be purchased with any federal subsidy. So, if you go to those huge supermarkets that exist in most places in the country, there are those 4 huge aisles in the middle, right? Over-the-counter medication, hygiene products, cleaning supplies, paper goods. What would it mean for you as an individual not to be able to buy any of those? What do? Do you come to a job interview in dirty clothing? I always think of myself as a pretty flexible employer. If someone came into my office with their child in tow and said to me, my sitter, I couldn't get a sitter, I would really think, well, are they going to be able to get to work without their child, right? If someone came in dirty clothing, I would have pause, right? If a woman came in on her period and was bleeding, didn't have enough period product, I'd really have to think about hiring that person, right? Because we have expectations. And when people don't have their basic needs met, they can't meet those expectations. And then they are closed out of society. And we do it on purpose. We do it, so that, people who look the same get the jobs. We do it for these reasons that are really quite hurtful to much of our society. Mm-hmm. And so diapers are just one part, but they are a part that I think sheds a lot of light on the other things going on.
They definitely are. And you mentioned that, putting yourself in that perspective of what do you do to get out of the house in the morning? And I can't not think about the time spent in the bathroom, getting clean, getting refreshed, mm-hmm. feeling like, the best version of myself as I walk out the door. And one thing that you unpack in your book is water. And we've heard about water situations in places like Flint and in Baltimore, but it's actually much more widespread. It's in Chicago. It's everywhere right now. And I think that you help raise that conversation. So how has water and infrastructure of that become what you've called a poverty issue?
I think the water chapter was the most shocking of the book for both of us. We learned a lot.
Yes, I would agree.
Water systems in this country were generally built after the Second World War. At that point, it was just fine to use lead pipes, totally acceptable. So there are flints all over this country. And we haven't looked. The testing for lead that many states use is very unsensitive, right? Because we don't want to know. We don't fund our infrastructure because we don't have a fair taxation system, right? When Eisenhower was president, the top tax rate was 91%. And guess what? There were still rich people. And you could buy water systems. But now you can't. So when there is a disaster, when it becomes clear that one of these systems has to die, the city will take over and will spend a lot of money fixing it, and it will raise rates on the ratepayers. And that means that more and more ratepayers get frozen out of the system. Before the pandemic, about 10% of Americans couldn't afford their water bill. And it's devastating. You know, I talked to a woman in Detroit who'd experienced a shutoff, and it was her clear feeling that the water was a tool of gentrification. And I'm sure she's right. She said they closed the neighborhood parks, they closed the neighborhood school, and then they shut off my water. I do not feel welcome here. And we went to many communities that had never had water or had always had water that was, Joanne, something one shouldn't drink.
Right. The story, I think Colleen always knows, there was this one story in the book that just shook me to the core, which was we interviewed a number of people in a town, a small town in Alaska, and they never had running water. And not just that, they had an area in their community. So people collected the solid waste in bags and carried it to this area in the community where everything was collected. One of the women described to us that she didn't allow her children to play outside during the thaw because of the human waste. This is the United States. You know, yes, it's Alaska. It's still the United States. You know, the fact that that could happen here, you know, we see so much about developing countries and so much focus on water in developing countries. But we don't recognize the fact that water is not free in the United States. People sort of act like it is, you know, in this weird kind of way, but it's not. And so many people, although indoor plumbing is widely accepted and expected in the United States, it isn't everywhere. And one of the things we talked about was in our Better Way boxes about Lansing, Michigan, a city that made a decision not to have the problems that Flint had. They made a decision to get bonded, to raise money, and to change out their pipes. We could do that, and we choose not to.
Well, let's talk about that, because whether it's Alaska or Appalachia or Chicago, it's way more prevalent, I think, than we think about day to day. We talk about corporations like Nestle, who should be taxed and who can start to offer solutions to fund new pipes and things that you've talked about. But can you talk to us a little bit about what can we do? Where is there hope? Where is there action that we can take to start to make things better with water, and then moving forward in other remits of poverty too?
So on water, a real simple thing is don't buy bottled water. It's terrible for the environment, and it's basically corporations stealing water and leaving ratepayers to pay the cost. There's a great policy in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that has not spread around the country, but really should. There's a base level of water consumption that comes very cheaply, I don't know, $10 a month or something. And the more water you use, the more expensive that water becomes. So if you want to have yourself a golf course in the desert, good luck to you. It's going to be very, very expensive. You're going to need to pay a lot into the system. But if you are an ordinary person who needs water to drink and to get clean, it becomes quite affordable. And there are smart policy choices like that we could be making around the country. And Joanne, we saw the same thing with utilities.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are really good examples of utilities that basically have a sliding scale to allow people. Philadelphia has a really good example of that, where people are charged based on their income, not on the usage. And that makes much more sense, right? But for some reason, as a sort of society, we think of that as socialism, as opposed to just being fair, right? I think it goes back to sort of the whole issue. We like to name things and then make them other. And so we say, well, everybody should pay the same. That's the American way. But some of the other things that we really think of as abilities and things that people should do. You started by talking about the fact that we say that advocacy is simply not going away. And so, a big part of making change is being willing to use your voice, and being willing to use your voice regardless of who you are, to talk to people about these issues. Just last night, I was having dinner with some of my husband's family, and they were talking about, they had read the book and they were really nice and really complimentary, but we're talking about how often they find that lots of their friends don't want to talk about things like this. And so they don't. And so I think one of the things that Colleen and I really want people to think about is it's okay if people don't love that you want to talk about this. You need to talk about it anyway. People need to be aware of the fact that this is America. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, one of the things we suggest, you could do a diaper drive, right? And so that's a great thing for someone to do, a diaper drive or a food drive. But then we say, take it to the next level. Take a selfie and then send it to your elected officials and tell them that you vote based on how they vote, that you vote so that your neighbors have food and have diapers, and that is going to be your litmus test for voting for them. And, taking that extra step of taking the picture, it makes a difference, because your elected officials will see that and say, okay, this person doesn't just care enough to click a button to send me an email, but cares enough to go out and make this, to collect things, to donate them somewhere, and to take that moment to talk to me about it. So we really see that as a really important thing to do. And then I think Colleen's favorite thing of what we recommend is the old planning and zoning.
Yeah, I'm driving my local planning and zoning commission absolutely nuts. My town is 95% white, and they say, that's just the way it is. We don't know how it happened. Sure you do. Sure you do. There's a thing called exclusionary zoning. You can run for the Planning and Zoning Commission, which I will probably do if nobody else will. And you can make them change the rules. Just showing up is power, because most people don't want to. You can show up, and wherever you show up, you tell the truth about poverty, because we haven't told the truth about poverty in this country. We have lied about it. We have put it down to laziness or some kind of personal defect that people just need to fix in themselves. Mm-hmm. The structure stinks. We all need to fix the structure, right? Like everybody who showed up at Barbara's bookstore tonight, you have done something.
Right.
Because you're getting ready to tell the truth to poverty about everybody you encounter for the next 24 hours and hopefully way beyond.
Well, and there was a comment, Connie, thank you, about the action steps at the end of each chapter. that are in the book. And that was surprise and delight for me as I was reading and getting so fired up and pissed off and mad and curious. And then it was a lovely end to each chapter to feel like there is something, there is a frame of mind shift, there is something we can do. And I think these points of advice are helpful for me. And I would welcome any other comments here in our last 6 minutes, questions back to this group. But sometimes change feels insurmountable. It feels so grand a task, I don't even know where to start. And the perspective in this book that you've provided is it's one step. It's you, Joanne, saying, I'm going to start buying extra boxes of diapers when I'm at Costco. And then the next house over might hear of that. Your neighborhood might want to start to band together. And so that's what I would push this community to think about and relay to their communities is start small and grow momentum, and don't be afraid of that insurmountable change, because we'll get there if we as humans, again, Reverend, to use your word, if we as human beings can come together. Those small steps make up a lot of space.
Yeah, I think that is beautifully said, Katie, and exactly right. And I echo what Colleen said. Those of you tonight here at Barbara's Bookstore can help us to do that, and can really, our individual voices matter. And I think many of us forget that. And we think that our one voice doesn't change anything. And we think, and I think that's why, people are often silent in the face of horrible things, because they think everybody else is doing that. What can I do? What difference would it make? And I think that if people take anything from our book, it's that you can change this. Poverty is not gravity. It's just not. So, we can change it. And here's a question, Reverend Yuri, what's the best example you have of advocacy making a difference?
Troy, I appreciate the question in the chat. And as Katie, you were kind of raising the question, a few things kind of come to mind. For the last year or so, we've been in this kind of detached, physically distanced reality, which makes our ability to kind of connect around resource sharing a little more challenging. But there are a couple of things that we can do. Sometimes if I wanted to raise money for a cause using my social media page, I can do that. One of those causes can be a diaper bank near you. Help folks that you don't necessarily have to get to, right? My network probably extends across the country, so I don't necessarily need them to bring me the diapers, but if we can kind of leverage our ability to pool our resources and direct them in a way that allows for kind of concentrated effort where there's need and interest, that's one thing. The other thing is we got to change policy. This policy issue that makes it very cumbersome to be able to get essential resources. That's probably low-hanging fruit if we can just kind of apply the pressure. So here's what I would begin to say. Everybody that's going to is either watching this conversation, will see this conversation. You have an elected official. Begin to push your congressperson, your senator, to start fixing what's wrong with federal law as it relates to being able to use SNAP benefits to deal with essential resources. And I believe that Senator Duckworth is probably preparing if the bill hasn't been dropped, it may be coming back. We're keeping our eyes out for it so that we can begin to push it. The other thing is in the connections where we are, right? Government, $2 trillion of public appropriation goes through the states every year. That's even before you get to the federal budget. Some of this is making sure that we connect at the level where we find ourselves engaged. And to Colleen's point, if you decide that you want to run for zoning, let me know. I'll help with that campaign structure. That's kind of what we do.
I have your email.
Yeah. Right. I mean, either find someone who's going to run or put yourself in a position to be able to run, because the way you change systems is you often have to infiltrate them to get them to change from the inside out. So it's kind of that process. But I would suggest that if you have a network or a connection, what we're doing in Baltimore and other places is in every local government district, whether it's a councilmanic district or an aldermanic district like in Chicago, there are faith communities, be it Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever it is. There need to be community convenings with whoever your local rep is right there. They need to have a conversation. They need to be able to explain to you how they're going to assist in making sure that these policies change at the very granular level, which is very often local government. And the minute they start getting calls from coordinated community conversations, they're going to respond in ways, because they want to make sure they've got an election coming up. They're going to be coming to you asking for a vote. And I will always say that what comes before who in the dictionary and in life. If you want my vote, if you want me to vote for you, the who, you have to show me what you've done for the things that are important to me. Otherwise, we're having no conversation about that. So I think we leverage those points, and there's so much available in this time. Do a fundraising drive. Invite folks to partner with you, reach out to your local officials, and look out for that bill, because I promise you, you will likely get some email from somebody like me who's in recovery for something I've done a long time ago to make sure that I leave this world better than I may have contributed to it. We've got to do that, because this ain't the other America. This is this America, and we've got to make this America better.
Here is a question for you all. How do you feel about the idea of the government converting SNAP benefits to cash as a manner of solving the problem of how the program limits what people can buy?
So thank you for that question, Mark Rafman. I think that the issue is less about SNAP being able to be used for other things, and it's more about the amount of money. So at the National Diaper Bank Network, we actually don't advocate for SNAP being opened up, precisely because it is chronically underfunded. And our deep concern is that it will be basically a PR move as opposed to a move to actually help people get what they need. Right now, SNAP is, it's chronic. It is woefully underfunded. And if all that happens is we say, hey, use it for whatever you want, it makes it so that I can't say that there's no federal subsidy that can be used for diapers, but it doesn't do anything aside from that. So unless there is an ability to increase SNAP benefits significantly, I would not advocate for opening them up to other things. Whether they're cash or not, that's a separate conversation, and I'm happy to have it with you, Mark. But the issue of if WIC or SNAP benefits should be opened up, should only be opened up with a considerable increase in how they're funded. And since we don't anticipate that, we don't advocate for that particular change.
And it kind of goes to this global issue of dependency, right?
Right.
Every kind of public assistance program to help low-income people is subsistence, because if you make people comfortable, then they'll get dependent and they won't want to work. Like, nobody is comfortable on public assistance in the United States. Nobody. People are hungry on public assistance. So more.
I want to end with a parting thought, and it's off of something, Reverend, was your last comments, but then what's been woven in with what Colleen and Joanne have said. If there is any silver lining to the last year, everything that's happened, I think that ears and eyes are open more now than they have been in a long time. And we'll take the good from some of that bad and say now would be the time, if you three agree, to speak up, to volunteer, to call the legislators, get involved in your local politics, because this feels like the time. Would you agree?
100%.
No better time than the present. If not now, when? If not us, who? I don't think the question is who's going to get the credit for pushing this. We do know if we remain stagnant and in this posture, to what we've heard tonight, we're all going to be responsible and have to accept some blame. The poor don't have to remain with us, but it takes the courage and the willingness to recognize it's going to be a long fight. Yeah. It's going to be met with some resistance, but there's never been anything meaningful that wasn't worth fighting for. This is that fight. This is that issue. It crosses demographics and issues and geographic boundaries. It gets to the core of what makes us human, and that's the ability to respond to one another's needs with compassion. So let's get to a compassionate fight, and let's finally eradicate poverty, not just here, but let's start here, and then let's take it around the world.
I love that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your time, for speaking with us. Thank you for everyone who participated tonight. We look forward to any follow-up questions, but please read Broken America if you haven't. Spread the word for this very important message. And you all have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.